Shabbat Shalom. We're starting Pasha Mishpatim. As an introduction, I want to tell you about a boy that I know, and his name is Kenny. And Kenny is a very, very picky eater, and he only likes foods that are sweet. And every single time his mother makes him something, he doesn't want to eat it until she puts sugar on it, until some sort of sugar or honey. And every single time she makes dinner, he says, no, if it's not sweet, I don't want it. And he hates bitter food, salty food, spicy foods, very, very picky eater. And usually what happens is that, God forbid, if you ever get sick, the father has a very hard time giving him his medication because, as we know, medications are bitter, antibiotics are bitter. You usually have to wait till he goes to sleep, you have to give it through his arm, you have to give it all different types of ways in order for him to take his medication. So anyway, one time, a little Kenny, he gets sick. And the doctor has to prescribe an antibiotic. And the father is asking the doctors, if you could do me a favor, my son, he hates medication. He hates anything bitter. He won't take it. We'll force it down his throat. It's a whole to-do every single time you want to give him something to make him feel better. If you could, just do me a favor, give him a medication that tastes good. Bubblegum flavor, cherry flavor, one of the flavors in order for making it easier for him to swallow it out. Doctor said, no problem. And he wrote a prescription, cherry flavored medication, and that was going to be the medicine. All of a sudden, it comes time to take his dosage, and the kid is fighting because he thinks it's bitter. He thinks he's fighting. And then all of a sudden, once the father and the mother, they hold him down, they stuff it in his mouth, and he realizes that it's sweet, then he's like, oh, it's sweet, maybe it's not so bad. And the next time he needs to take the medication, instead of running away and fighting, this time he wanted to take it. That's a mashal, by the way. The mashal is that we find something strange. Because we all know from when we were kids that when the Jewish people got the Torah, what did we say? We said the words Na'aseh Nishma. The truth is, Na'aseh Nishma is not found in last week's parasha. Most people think it's in Yitro when we actually got the Torah. It's not there. It's actually this week's parasha Mishpatim. Na'aseh Nishma. What does Na'aseh Nishma mean? We will do, we will listen. It means to say we're taking the Torah without any, we accept it with happiness. No strings attached, exactly. But there's famous Gemara on Shabbat. And the Gemara says that before the Jews accepted the Torah, what did Hashem have to do, Jonathan? Hashem had to take a mountain. He had to hold it over their heads. Kafa lehem har gigit. He held it over their heads like a gigit, which is like a barrel. And he said, if you accept the Torah, mutav. And if you don't, sham tiyeh kivuratchem. This is going to be your burial spot. And the question is, hold on a second. What in the world happened to Na'aseh Nishma? You told us ever since we were kids, Na'aseh Nishma, yeah, we love Na'aseh Nishma. And then all of a sudden you read this Gemara, har gigit, sham tiyeh kivuratchem. What in the world happened to Na'aseh Nishma? So the Tosfot answers on the spot. He goes, no, it's not a contradiction. Na'aseh Nishma was done Torah shebektav. That's on the written Torah, that's Na'aseh Nishma. But the oral tradition, which is really like the rabbis and the Talmud, that was a little hard to swallow, and at that Hashem had to hold the mountain over their heads. That's the answer of Tosfot. But according to the mashal that we just gave, the mashal with little Kenny and taking bitter medicine versus the sweet medicine, once Kenny tasted the medicine, he realized it wasn't bitter anymore, it was finally sweet, then he wanted to continue tasting it. The same thing happened with the Jewish people. The Jewish people, when we got the Torah in Yitro, we were afraid that it was bitter. We are Kenny in the mashal. We only like sweet foods. We only like sweet things. And when we got the Torah in Yitro, we were very afraid that it was bitter. So God had to force us to take it by holding the mountain over our heads. He had to force us. And once we took it, and once we tasted it, and once we understood that it was sweet the whole time, now we come along to Parashat Mishpatim and we say, it's okay, now give it to me. That's the Na'aseh Nishma. So the har gigit was the Yitro. Har gigit was what, because we thought it was bitter. But once we knew it was sweet, once we got the flavor in our mouths, that's when we said Na'aseh Nishma. Therefore, it's our responsibility to make sure the Torah in our mouths, it's sweet. How does a person say good tasting in Hebrew? Anybody know? Tam. Very good, tam. And how do you say a reason in Hebrew? What is the tam? What is the reason? So therefore, in order to make the Torah sweet to us sometimes, we have to come up with what? The tam. In order to make it tam, we have to give the tam. In order to make it taste good, we have to give a good reason for it. Now, based on that introduction, that we have to give good reasonings behind our commandments, I thought to take a commandment in this week's parasha that actually repeats itself 3 times in the Torah, and I want to know the reason for this mitzvah or the reason for this avera. Can we look inside the very first source in order to understand what I'm talking about? The very first source in our parasha, it says in Perek Chav Gimel Pasuk Yutet, Reshit Bikurei Admatecha, Tavi Beit Hashem Elokecha. What is Bereshit Bikurei Admatecha? What are we talking about? Bikurim, where the person has an obligation that when he plants his first fruits, he has to mark the first fruit that came out and give that fruit to who? To the Kohanim. You know what it's kind of like? You know when a person makes a sale for the first time in his business? I give this mashal all the time. The first time you make a sale, you don't put that $20 bill inside the cash register. You take the $20 bill and you duct tape it to your cash register in order to realize this was the first sale I ever made. You had that in the barbershop, Zima? Yeah, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. You duct tape that $20 bill to your mirror. Now every single time you look at it, you say, that's a $20 that I made. The same thing when it comes to bikurim. The person, again, you have to keep in mind, but the main type of employment that back in the day was, they grew fruits, they grew vegetables, they were farmers. Therefore, the first time you have a fruit, you right away mark it. First one, and you give it to the Kohen as a thank you to God. That's what the first part of this pasuk says. Then the second part of the pasuk continuation says, the pasuk, Lo tevashel gedi behalev imo. You shall not cook a goat in the mother's milk. Now, what is this commandment coming to tell me? He says Rashi on the spot, B'gimel mikomot nichtav b'Torah. 3 times, in fact, 3 times this pasuk is mentioned, Lo tevashel gedi b'halev imo. Why? Echad isur achila. One, to tell me that I cannot eat milk and meat together. Ve'echad isur hana. I cannot have any hana'ah from it. That means that I cannot own a McDonald's store that's selling cheeseburgers because that's me getting hana'ah from the milk and meat. And thirdly, and thirdly is I cannot cook these two things together. And therefore I have 3 items. I have isur achila, isur hana'ah, isur bishul. Now my question is as follows. 2-part question, two-pronged question. Number 1, what is the connection? What is the connection between bikurim and lo tevashel gedi b'halev imo? You see, in Torah, you want to tell me we can do that. In Torah, we can ask, why is one pasuk written in the same pasuk as a different concept? See, in newspaper, when you have the news day, you can't do that. You can't do it. You can't say, why is the article of the weather next to the article that Trump is throwing out all the Mexicans from New York? You can't say that. You can't say what's the connection to the weather to Trump. You can't say it. It's impossible. But in Torah, you could ask, why is one pasuk next to the other? So therefore, my question is, what is the connection between bikurim, bringing the first fruits, to this mitzvah of abstaining from milk and meat? And finally, my last question is, just what is the isur? What is the reason? Why would God want to command us to stay away from meat and milk? I would come to argue that meat and milk is pretty cheap. A person could get a cheeseburger at McDonald's for $1 versus our restaurants, it costs about $12, $13. It's not much rather be spending the dollar at McDonald's. So why is it that God says you cannot have milk and meat together? Is that a fair question? Yeah? Does anybody off the top of their heads know why we can't have milk and meat together? Sounds like something that we do all our lives, but for some reason we can't come up with an idea of why it's going to be. So that's a good answer. But let's hear Rubinoff answer. Rubinoff is about to give us 3 answers of why we cannot have milk and meat together. Look into Rubinoff, which is the second source. Says Rubinoff, he says, Hapishat Ta'am. Again, Tama mitzvah, the flavoring, the sweetness of the mitzvah, hazot lefishu mitamtem et halev. Because having meat and milk together, it corrupts or poisons the heart. How does having meat and milk together poison the heart? Says Rabbi Bachya something unbelievable. He says, Sharei hachalav naaseh min hadam. Because where does an animal's milk come from? Where does it come from? Well, it comes from the same way how a woman has milk when she gives birth to a child, is that the blood in her body actually turns into the milk. That's a fun fact, by the way. Gemara says this, that's why that a lady, she doesn't have any menstrual cycle at the time that she's nursing, breastfeeding, because her menstrual cycle turns into the milk that she gives to the child. And therefore, the same way a woman doesn't have any blood when she is nursing, because that blood turns into the milk. So to animals, the reason why animals have milk is because their blood turns into the milk. Therefore, it says Rabbeinu Bachya, V'hadam mizago ra. He goes, the characteristic trait of blood is evil. When a person sees blood, what does it identify as? It identifies as something negative, as a bad character, as cruelty. Blood equals cruelty. Therefore, it's mulid achzariyut. It can make a person turn to somebody that's very cruel. And therefore, blood on its own, it's considered a bad character trait. And even though now the milk of the animal turned from blood into milk, even though it turned into something completely different, this is his chidush. Listen to the following. When you take that milk and you mix it again with meat, it goes back to its original state and it turns into the bad character that blood really gives you. And therefore he says, it goes back to its original state of blood and the power which blood represents, how we shown the first, the original, and therefore when you eat it, what are you doing? You're not eating a cheeseburger, meat mixed with milk. You're eating blood. And then once a person eats blood, it has an ability, it corrupts your heart in order to turn you into a cruel and evil person. Can I give you an example what I think he's talking about? If you remember back in Parashat Pinchas, when Pinchas kills Zimri and Kozbi, God says, as a gift, the fact that you stood up for my honor, I'm going to give you what's called Briti Shalom. What's Briti Shalom? I'm going to give you peace. What does peace mean? What does the fact that he gave him peace have to do with the fact that he killed somebody? Our Rabbi's answer is the Or HaMakadosh. He says, unbelievable. He says that, that one day, back in the time, there used to be what's called Ir HaNidahat. What's Ir HaNidahat? You know what that is? Ir HaNidahat? It's a city in which the majority of its inhabitants worshipped Avodah Zarah. Most of the people in that city, they bow down to idols. What is the halacha, Yonatan? If you have a city in Israel that majority of its people bow down to idols, what's the answer? We have to burn the city to the ground, and we have to kill everybody in that city by sight. You have to kill everybody with sword. Now keep in mind, what used to be the Jewish army? What used to be? What did it comprise of? What was the component of the Jewish army? It used to be the rabbis. It used to be the religious people, the guys sitting and learning in the yeshiva. That used to be the composition of the Israeli or the Jewish army back in the day. And therefore, you didn't have what you have today in the idea of you have the religious unit, you have the non-religious unit, the guy with the kippah guy, you have the guys with the peyot, none of that. You have the guys that are only yeshiva, those are the guys that fought inside a war. Now let me tell you something about killing somebody. When you kill somebody for the first time, it's shocking. For the first time, your hand's going to shake and you're going to have to go to therapy after that. That's why there's a special unit inside the police force, special psychologists that deal with first-time kills. The first time a police officer gets into a officer-involved shooting, as they call it, that officer must seek psychiatric help because they know that when you kill somebody, it's traumatizing. Now imagine if you're a guy learning in a yeshiva, you're learning in the kollel the entire day, everything's great, you have the coffee with you, you have the Gemara open in front of you, you have your rabbis teaching you, everything's great, and all of a sudden, you get a phone call, and who's talking? The prophet is talking, the Navi is talking, he's saying, Rabotai, everybody get your swords, and you gotta go to Yanidah, you gotta kill everybody. Imagine that guy's coming home from kollel after that long day of slaughtering hundreds of people. He comes home with his suit jacket and his tie on and the dandruff on his shoulders. He has blood all over his hands. And his wife says, oh my God, where were you? What in the world happened? He goes, don't even ask. Don't even ask. You don't know what I went through today. You know our neighbor, that guy? Yeah, I killed him. Also, that guy I work with on 40, I killed him also. That guy, I murdered that guy. I murdered that guy. So what happens when a person gets too used to killing? He becomes akhzar. He becomes very cruel because of it. Or HaMikadosh said that when in his town, he used to talk to the Arabs. The Arabs were in charge of the beheading of the people. They were in charge of beheading for the Sultan. And when he asked them, he goes, what do you feel when you chop people's heads off? They said, Rabbi, we love it. Besides the fact that Arabs are murderers themselves, they said, Rabbi, we love killing. Why? Because the more that you kill somebody, the more you get used to it, the more you don't mind when it happens. That's why, by the way, that is the secret. Anybody watch a documentary about what happens to these young kids in Mexico? They get inducted into the gangs at very young ages. They come out to be the most cruel people. Why? Because the more crime you commit, the more murder you commit, the more of an akhzar, the more of a cruel person you will be. And therefore, that's why the Torah says, Bayir HaNidachad, God tells those yeshiva guys that are killing the people of Yir HaNidachad, Pasuk says, I'll read you the words as follows when he says it inside. He says the words over here, he says, that even though, listen to this, even though those people, even though you're going to have these yeshiva guys that are killing hundreds of people because they worship Avodah Zarah, God says, I'm going to have mercy on you, and I'm not going to make it where that cruelty is going to be involved in your life. Means that God is going to say, I'm going to give you a chance to kill people, but I'm going to take away that bad character that murder creates. And now go back to our story. When God promises Pinchas, I'm going to give you Briti Shalom. What does that mean, Briti Shalom? I'm going to give you covenant of peace. That means Pinchas, even though you killed Zimri, and even though you might have gotten used to killing, I'm going to make it where that akhzariyut doesn't born within you. I'm going to take away the cruelty that is born along with killing somebody. And therefore you're still going to be the same nice guy you were before the murder to you were after the murder. That's what means Briti Shalom. So that's my point. My point is, when I'm trying to bring out the point is that when a person eats meat and milk together, the milk that mixed with the meat, it goes back to being blood. And therefore says the Rabbeinu Bachya, when you eat the blood, it makes you into a cruel person. And therefore that's why he says, what at least has his first reason of why is it asur to eat milk and meat together, is because the milk originates from the blood of the animal. And therefore when you eat the milk of the animal together with the meat of the animal, it goes back to its original teva, which is blood, and blood represents cruelty. The more you eat blood, the more you eat milk and milk together, the more cruel person you will get. And therefore he says that's why it's asur. He says mitamten et alev. That is the first answer of the Binu Bachya. Second answer of the Binu Bachya, he brings the Rambam. Says the Rambam continuation, "Rambam zal katav b'zeh ta'am mitamei hamitzvot ki miprei shaya minhag ovdei elilim shayu ochlim basar v'chalav bebeit arbutam b'mei hagichem al kein bag haTorah le'asur otom." Because the minhag of the goyim was usually on their holidays they would get together, they would have a holiday lamb, they would have a holiday ham, they would have the milk, they would have the meat. Therefore, since this was a thing that was exclusively for goyim, therefore the Torah said, don't have milk and meat together. Why? Because it's a goyish item. It's considered something that only chukot goyim, and therefore don't eat it.
The Gemara usually brings that down, not the Torah.
The what?
The chukot goyim. That's why they bring the
tethers. That's fine. I'm not giving you reasons from the Torah. The Torah just says don't eat it. The question is why.
I'm saying usually the Gemara brings down, oh, the goyim do this, so we shouldn't do it. But it's not the Torah that says, oh, the goyim do
That's fine. Okay, I accept. Bottom line is, Rubinoff, Bachya, what does he say? What is his reasoning why you can have meat and milk together? Says Rubinoff Bachya in the last paragraph, "V'chein u'min hanireh ki hatamim ha'ele bilitim maspikim ve'enam ikar mitam mitzvot." He goes, all these reasoning, whether it's because mitamtemet alev, or whether it's because the goyim do it, all those things are really just side reasonings. They're just in order to answer somebody who asks you, why can't I have meat and milk? So you're going to tell him, mitamtemet alev. El lidchot et shoel. Just pushing him away. He says, bottom line is, the reason why we don't have milk and meat together, like Roman said, because it's a chok. What's a chok? It's a mitzvah that doesn't have a reason behind it. Just like para aduma, just like sir azazel, these things are chukim, and therefore we're not coming along and trying to guess what's the reason. Bottom line is, because Hashem said, Ki b'chla para aduma b'sir mishtaleach, ki darshu azal da'tid lavo, in the future. Hashem is going to reveal all the secrets of the Torah. Bottom line is, Hashem says, at the end of time, I'm going to reveal what is the real reason of my chukim. Okay, is that clear? Good? Okay, that's all Al Pi HaPshat. Now let's get a little deeper. Let's get inside the Kabbalah. What is the reason why, according to the Mikubalim, it's going to be asur to have milk and meat together? Listen to what the Shlach HaKadosh says in the third paragraph. Says the Shlach HaKadosh, Tam basar v'chalav. What is the reason why we have the isur of basar v'chalav? Katav harikanti, one of the Rishonim. Shehu besod. This is the reason. Kilayim. What's kilayim? Mixture. Sha'anez. You can't wear wool. You can't wear wool and linen together. So to basar v'chalav, it's a type of sha'anez. It's a type of kilayim. What's the kilayim behind it? Me'orav kochot ha'elyonim. Oh, now we're getting into the upper worlds. It's certain kohot, certain strength or power that exists in the upper world. Ki basar hu adom, because meat, what color is it? It's red. Hu mitzad koach hadin. That comes from din. That comes from judgment. However, halav, what color is halav? It's white. That's hence the title of the shiur, white and red. Shehu avan mitzad hamim. So therefore, meat, what does it represent? Meat represents judgment, which is din. And halav, it represents the hamim, which is white. And therefore, the reason why, according to the Shlach HaKadosh, I cannot mix meat and milk together is because meat is din, milk is rahamim, and therefore when I put these two things together, I'm mixing din and rahamim, which is no good, and therefore that's considered kilayim, that's considered sha'anez, and therefore don't touch meat and milk together. Is that clear what he's saying? Comes the Ben Ish Chai, and he echoes his words and he elaborates. Says the Ben Ish Chai, unbelievable, he says, Ubazeh katvu hamikubalim. Tam le'esor achilat basar v'chalav mipnei she'abasar hu sod hadinim kamur la'el, because again basar is din, basar is judgment, but halav hu sod rahamim, and milk is rahamim, milk is white, therefore that represents God's mercy. V'katav harav mikubal morenu Rabbi Sasul Mordechai, one of the mikubalim in Baghdad, this is what he said, nir'eh shelefi zeh im achal chalav tichila. If a person ate milk first, could a person eat meat afterwards? Yeah, of course. We do that on Shavuot. We have the little milk, and then we have meat afterwards. If a person eats milk first, what did he digest first? According to the Kabbalah, he first had chesed first. The rahamim went inside his body first, and once the rahamim goes inside his body, the rahamim is there already. That's it. Now his body is filled with rahamim. If he were to eat meat afterwards, that's okay. Why? Because we have a rule in halakha. Halakha means tata'a gavad. That means whatever is on the bottom that overtakes whatever's on top. And therefore, since the guy ate rahamim first, he ate the halab first, and then the meat fell in afterwards, that's okay. Why? Tata'a gavad. Because the bottom, it overpowered what's on top, and therefore right now he just filled with rahamim. That's what the Ben Ish Chai says. However, you can eat meat after you eat milk, even before the milk digests. Why? Tata'a gavad, because the bottom overpowers the top. And therefore the chesed, it overpowers the deen, which comes afterwards. However, what happens if a guy eats meat first? What happens? The deen goes in first. The judgment goes in first. You cannot eat milk afterwards. Because if you eat milk first, if you eat milk second, the dinim are going to overpower the rahamim, and then we're in big trouble. Either wait until the meat digests. After 6 hours, the meat digests. No more meat in your body anymore. Eat halab. The halab goes inside. You have rahamim. Everything's good. Then once the meat digests, the dinim are over. The dinim are gone. That's what he says. Unbelievable. So do we understand so far? The whole connection is between deen and rahamim. The reason, according to the Ben Ish Chai, it's asur to have meat and milk together because you're mixing deen with rahamim. Based on the Ben Ish Chai, I thought to explain a fascinating Gemara on Pesachim that always bothered me. You know what the Gemara says? The Gemara says that not everybody is permitted to eat meat. You have to be a certain level of person in order to eat meat. What does the Gemara say? Look inside Gemara Pesachim Daf Mem Tet. Says the Gemara Tanya, Rabbi Omer, Am Haaretz. What's Am Haaretz? What's Am Haaretz? Unlearned ignoramus, as they call him. Ignoramus, asur lechol basar. Ignoramus cannot eat meat. By the way, if you don't know Torah, there's no meat for you. Meat is not on the menu. Why not? Shneimar, Zot Torah behema ve'of, because it says Zot Torah behema ve'of. It connects the behema ve'of to the Torah. Kol ha'osek b'Torah. If you learn Torah, mutar le'chol basar ve'of, behema ve'of. You can eat meat. You can eat chicken. Oh, she'eino osek b'Torah. If you don't know no Torah, asur le'chol basar behema ve'of. There's no meat for you. You have to become a vegetarian. And the question is why? The Gemara doesn't say why. All the Gemara says is if you're Amma Aret, you don't know how to learn, no meat for you. But if you are Tamir Chacham, you could eat meat. Gemara doesn't explain why. What is the reasoning, Rabbi? I want to give you the simple Peshan first, and then we'll go into something deeper. So this is the Ben Ish Chai again. Ben Yoyada on this Gemara, he comments, and he says as follows. He says, because you know what happens is that sometimes if an Amma Aretz, if he gets too used to eating meat, he eats meat at home, he eats meat at office, he eats meat, everything's kosher, by the way, everything's kosher. But he's going to get too used to eating meat, he's going to love the meat, and all of a sudden he might be in a situation where he doesn't have any kosher meat. The guy's going on a trip somewhere, he's going on a cruise somewhere, and all of a sudden they come to him and say, listen, sir, would you like the tomahawk steak? It's not kosher, by the way. He says, oh, tomahawk steak. I remember yesterday at home, my wife waited for me, it was so delicious, I cannot not eat a tomahawk steak. So we're afraid that in case the Amma Aretz is going to be in a situation where he gets too used to eating meat, and then all of a sudden he's not going to have kosher meat available, he's going to say, you know what, I'll close my eyes, and I'll have the non-kosher meat. That is a simple pshat why Amma Aretz cannot have meat, is because we're afraid he might be in a situation where it's not kosher, and he's too used to eating the kosher stuff, and he's just going to come along, he's just going to eat. It says the Ben Ish Chai Ben Yoyada, second to last source, Amma Aretz Ulecho Bazar, Yireli, Lav Isura Mamash. When it says he's not allowed, Asur, it doesn't mean Asur Mamash. It's not like, breaking Shabbat. It's not what it means. It just means, Kishan Isurim, Kishan Zechli Hafresho Mimenu. That doesn't mean that you have to pull away like you're breaking Shabbat. Ela Kavana, Rotzeh Lomar, Eno Ra'ui Shechol Basar. Says the Ben Ish Chai means that it's not befitting. It's better that he doesn't eat meat, according to the Ben Ish Chai. Whatever. What's the reason? Because since eating meat, it revolves around many laws. You have to know how to slaughter the animal. You have to know how to salt the animal. You have to know how to cook the meat properly. And if Amma Aretz, he doesn't know how to do these things. He doesn't know any Torah. Then how is he supposed to know how to do these things? Says the Ben Ish Chai. שחיטה, טרפות, ואם עם הארץ יאכל בשר ויגיל בו, if the עם הארץ is eating too much meat, he gets too used to it, כאשר יזדמן במקום שאין שם שוחט ישראל. If he finds himself in a situation where there's no Jewish slaughterer, where there's no kosher slaughterer, he goes to Tzivina, he's on a cruise, or midbar, or he's in the midbar, he's in the desert. He won't be able to overcome his desire for the meat. That he might come to eat non-kosher meat shel goyim. You hear that? If a guy doesn't have Torah, he won't be able to overcome his desire. Since right now he has a nice piece of non-kosher meat in front of him, because he's not religious, he's just going to go ahead, he's just going to eat it. Don't even eat meat, even in a place of even if he has kosher meat. In order not to get the ta'aba used to. That is a simple interpretation of why the Gemara says that Am Haaretz should not eat meat. Why can't he eat meat? Again, he might find himself in a situation where he doesn't have kosher meat, and he's just going to go ahead, he's just going to eat it because he's too used to the kosher stuff. That is the answer going to Ben Ish Chai. However, there's a much deeper level. Listen to what I'm going to tell you as follows. This is important. The Arizal writes that the act of eating is a form of Avodat Hashem. Hear what I just said? The act of eating is also a form of serving God. See, I might have thought that where does a person serve God? He serves God in the shul, in the Beit Knesset, where he prays and he learns. But since the Arizal know that even a person's eating, when a person eats for the right reason, L'Shem Shamayim, when he eats for the right reasoning, that also can be a form of what? Of Avodat Hashem. It's clear. That's why, by the way, I think last week's parasha, if you remember, right after Yitro comes to the Midbar, what does it say about Aaron and Zikanim? It says, Vayashivu, that they ate, le'echol lechem, to eat bread, im choten Moshe. Who was it? Aaron and the Zikanim. And Rashi says on the spot, because if a person eats a meal with Tamid Chacham, it's almost as if he's eating with God himself, with the Shekhinah himself. Why? Because I would have thought that where is the service of God found? It's found only in the shul. It's found only in the Beit Midrash. It's found only in the place where we learn Torah. That's what the mistaken thought of Yitro was. That the only time a person can have a connection with God is when he abstains, when he's fasting. Says Aaron the Zikanim, that's absolutely incorrect. You can even have a relationship with God even while you're doing the most mundane acts like eating and like sleeping. You can still connect to Hashem in that situation. Food can be a conduit to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think I told the story last week. Do you guys remember the story that I told? How food can be a conduit to the service of God. Rabbi Zubashan tells the story. He said that one time, I said last week that when the state of Israel was found originally, it was found with non-religious goals in mind. In the 1940s, the Zionists, their whole goal was to eradicate like Torah Judaism from the land of Israel. They wanted to be a Jewish state, but a purely secular state. Purely secular. And therefore they had many ideas of how to uproot, even the people, the religious people that came from the old countries, from the Spartan countries, they had to make sure that there would be no Torah learning amongst them. Therefore, they read a story in many of the big rabbi biographies. They say that in the 1940s, 1950s, when a lot of Sephardic Jews came in from the old country, when they came in from Tashkent, they came in from Iran, they came in from a lot of places, they would gather them and they would put them in a place that's called ma'abarot. Ma'abarot were like these, not ghettos, but like these tents. These tents, and they would set up in these like kibbutzim, refugee camps, exactly, and they would keep them there for 4 or 5 months at a time. And their goal was to completely eradicate Judaism from these people. They're Jewish, but make them not religious completely. And when the Yemenites came in, and they had peot. Anybody know what Yemenites called peot?
Simon.
They call simanim, exactly. They call them signs. So they used to come, they used to shave off the simanim of the Yemenites. They used to cut off the braids of the girls, and they used to convince them that Judaism, or religious Judaism, was only in galut, was only in exile. But once you come to the land of Israel, that's it. You don't have to keep Torah anymore. You don't have to keep religion anymore. Now it's already, you can leave all that shtuyot behind you. Their goal was to eradicate Judaism from the religious people in those kibbutzim. And therefore, yes, they told them about very secular ideas. They told them about mixed dancing and also non-kosher food. Everything was mutar to them, and the only time you had to keep Torah was in the old country. Rabbi Zion Mutzafi says that in the Sephardic countries, people came with their tefillin. And in the morning when they used to wake up, they used to see the non-religious people. They used to take the tefillin and wrap them around the horses. In order to say that the tefillin, that was an old thing to do. You don't have to put on tefillin anymore. This thing doesn't exist. When the religious women came off the plane or came off the boat wearing tzniut clothing, the Israeli government had it set up on purpose. But you had non-religious women dressed in non-tzniut clothing, and they would say, no, you don't have to dress like this anymore. You don't have to dress all covered up. We don't do that here. In Israel, we dress We dress however we want. Their goal was to get the Jews to completely forget about the Judaism. So anyway, a lot of the rabbis, they would send their students over to these ma'abarot, to these refugee camps, in order to see which children, which families wanted a Torah education. By the way, if the parents spoke up, if the parents were seen trying to convince their children otherwise, they would threaten them that you're never going to see your children again. You're never going to see your kids again if you teach them about religion. Their whole goal was to get religion completely off. I think Yehuda Tzadka used to say that when he used to bless Sephardic people, he used to say, Hashem, your son should be a Tamid Chacham, or your son should be a Ben Torah. His answer was, are you trying to curse my kids? What are you cursing my kids for? I don't want them to be Tamid Chachamim. The old Tamid Chachamim were poor. They didn't understand the value of what it meant to be a Ben Torah. So therefore, that was the situation back in the day. And therefore, many rabbis, they sent their students in order to protect these Jewish kids. So Rabbi Zubashan tells a story. At one time there was a great Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. Everybody knows Rabbi Galinsky. He was a big Rosh Yeshiva, and he happened to be sent. He was in Siberia for over 8 years. He was in Siberia for 8 years. And one time they punished him, and they put him on a 40-day fast. 40 days, no food. Imagine that, 40 days, no food. I skip lunch, my body begins to shake. This guy didn't have food for 40 days, no food. And all of a sudden, at the end of the 40 days, they wanted to give him soup in order to nurse him back to health. And as again, it wasn't really soup. It was like hot water with like a little bit of salt. So that was the soup that he was going to get. But he was so excited, they put something in his mouth. And as he's about to eat, he looks over at the next jail cell, and there's a guy over there. His name was Chovel, I think his name was. His name was Cholev, sorry, his name was Cholev. And Cholev was in the middle of his 40 days. He didn't eat anything yet, but he's in the middle of his 40 days. And he said to himself, should I share my soup? Should I not share my soup? And then thinks to himself, come on, Yankele. How are you going to eat soup when this guy next to you is in the middle of his 40-day fast? So he decided he was going to split the soup with the guy. Split the soup halvesies. He had half, and Cholev was very, very appreciative of the fact that he shared him with his food. Anyway, what happens? After the war, after the Siberia camp, they both went their separate ways. And now, Rabbi Galinsky was sent by the Hazon Ish to one of these refugee camps in order to see which children wanted to go to Talmudei Torah. So he gets there, he breaks inside the refugee camp, and the people that were in charge, the non-religious Zionists, they find him, and they handcuff him, and they put him down. They say, listen, you're not supposed to be here. I don't know what you want, but we're going to send you out. We're going to punish you, we're going to send you out. And as they're talking to each other, they're going to say, we're going to wait till Cholev comes, and Cholev is going to know what to do with them. Apparently, Cholev was in charge. He's trying to think. He goes, where do I know that name from? Where does the name Cholev sound so familiar? Then it hits him. He goes, I remember. Cholev is the guy that was with me in Siberia that I shared my soup with. Because maybe the fact that I gave him a little of my hot soup, maybe it's gonna put him on my side. All of a sudden, he sees Cholev. Cholev remembers Rabbi Galinsky. They hug each other. They kiss each other. And because he has so much hakarat hatov for him, he asks him, listen, he goes, besides getting me out of here, he says, I want to know how many of these parents want to send their kids to get a good Jewish education. And even though Cholev was a Zionist, Cholev was completely non-affiliated, but he said, because Rabbi Galinsky did me a favor so many years ago, I'm going to repay him. So he went around and he asked everybody who wants to send his kids Jewish education. He got 65 families to sign up. Imagine from those 65 families, how much hundreds of Bnei Torah probably came out of those families. 65 families that want to give their children Jewish education. He was able to take them out of the refugee camp and build religious homes with them. And where did this come from? Where did it all stem from, Abutai? It all stemmed from what? From a little bit of hot soup. Therefore, you see that food can be the conduit to what? It can be the conduit to your Avodat Hashem. You can connect to God through food. Now, based on that, I want you to listen very carefully what that Arizal says. Arizal says that the purpose of eating is to elevate holy sparks. I don't know how else to call them. In Hebrew, it's called nitzotzot kedusha. Nitzotzot, there are certain sparks. You know what I imagine as? Imagine if when a person eats food, they're like, ever play Mario before? You know Mario, yeah, Yaakov? You know how sometimes Mario has to collect those golden coins, or when you're playing Sonic, let's say. Sonic has those golden coins. So imagine that when a person is doing mitzvot, and he needs to collect, he needs to collect holy sparks. These Sonic coins, these gold coins, or these Mario coins, they're found in the food that we eat. And not only that, he says, but it's also found in the 4 categories of creation. Anybody know what the 4 categories of creation are? Says that Rabbi, you don't have to guess, it's right there on the paper, the last line. Says Rabbeinu Ari, Yesh arba chalukim beberayah. There are 4 different types of creation. Ve'elohein, these are the following: domem, tzomeach, chai, umedaber. What is that? Domem is something inanimate. All the inanimate objects of creation, that's what's called domem. What's an example of an inanimate creation? A rock, or let's say water can be inanimate, and it has to be stationary. That's considered a domem, is stationary. The next what's called tzomech. What's tzomech? Tzomech is something that grows. Vegetation, grass, flowers, trees, that's called tzomech. The next line is chai. What's chai? They're alive, but they don't have the koach of dibur. They can't speak, and therefore animals are in the category of chai. And finally, which the highest level is medaber. What's medaber? That's human beings. Human beings, we have the koach to speak, and therefore says the Rabbeinu Ari that these four types of creation, chai, not chai, but domem, tzomeach, chai, medaber. Each one of these things have nitzotzot kedusha inside of them, and when you combine these things together, the nitzotzot, they elevate themselves until finally you get the medaber. And once you get to medaber, it's the highest elevation of the nitzotzot possible. Let me give you an example. A person has water. Water is which category?
Domem.
Is domem. So therefore it has a very low level of nitzotzot. But all of a sudden, once the water pours onto the plant, now the domem connects with the tzomeach, and whatever nitzotzot were inside the domem, it transferred over to the tzomeach. Why? Because the tzomeach pulled out the nutrients from the water, and now it's using the water to grow. So now you have the tzomech, you have the vegetation combined with the domem. It has a higher level of nitzotzot. And all of a sudden, what happens to the grass? Who comes to eat it? The cow. The cow comes to eat the domem, and it comes to eat the tzomech, and now the cow, which is high, it has an even higher level of nitzotzot. And then finally, what happens in the medaber, the human being, we take the cow, and again, we're the highest amount of nitzotzot. We slaughter the cow by shechita, shekidishanu, nishchot, ala shechita, we slaughter. After we slaughter it, we make a bracha, and we eat it. Once that happens, the medaber, the highest level of elevation of nitzotzot, it happens at that spot. That's what the Rabbi explains. That's when you eat, you're collecting a lot of nitzotzot. You don't see it, but inside your food is a tremendous amount of elevation of sparks taking place. Says the Arizal. But this only works, by the way, it only works if you do the proper Jewish ritual over the meat. Because if you come along and you shoot the cow in the head and you take it and you start tearing off limbs and you're eating it like a barbarian, there's no elevation of it. So it doesn't. It's dead on arrival. It doesn't go anywhere. Therefore, says that reason. Now I understand the Gemara. Now I understand the Gemara that says that Ama'aretz is asur to eat meat. Why is it asur for him to eat meat? Because if the whole goal of life is to elevate nitzotzot, and this Ama'aretz, when he's eating the meat, he's not making a baracha, or he's not doing shechita properly, the nitzotzot do not get elevated. It's dead on arrival. And that's why the Gemara says it's asur for Ama'aretz to eat meat, because when he doesn't elevate the nitzotzot the way it's supposed to be elevated. That's the interpretation of the Gemara. Now going back to what we said, according to the Ben Ish Chai, what's the reason for meat and milk again? What's the reason, Rabotai, for meat and milk? Is because you're mixing. You're mixing chesed, din together, and that's no good. But I'll tell you why I'm confused. Again, get the Ben Ish Chai good. According to the Ben Ish Chai, why can we have meat and milk together? Is because you're mixing din and rahamim. Din is the meat, it's the red, and the halav is the rahamim, it's white. We're mixing it together, that's no good. Why do I have a problem with this? Why do I have a problem? Because the very first pasuk in the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim, et hashamayim et haaretz. What name do we use of God? Use Elokim. What's Elokim? Elokim is din. Elokim is judgment. What's Yud Kei Vav Kei? Rahamim. So specifically, God used the name Elokim. Why did He use Elokim? Look at Rashi. Look at the first source on the next page. Says the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz. Says Rashi, bara Elokim v'lo ne'amar bara Yud Kei Vav Kei. It doesn't say that God, Hashem, Havaya, made the world. Shebetchila ala b'machshava libroto b'mitadin. In the beginning, when God created the world, He wanted to create it using midat hadin, all judgment. It would have been a very different world if God created the world only full of judgment. However, Ra'ah, she'ena ha'olam mitkayem. He saw that if I create the world with din, the world won't be able to exist. What did He do? He gdim midat rahamim v'shitfa l'midat hadin. So what did He do? Hashem sprinkled midat rahamim on the midat hadin, and therefore He made what's called the mituk. What's a mituk? It's a combination. He sweetened the judgment. He took midat hadin, He took the midat rahamim, He mixed it together, and everything's fine. That's what it says in the pasuk. Beyom asot yud kei vav kei Elokim eretz v'shamayim. The day that Hashem Havaya and Elokim, He created the ground and He created the world. Therefore, I see that when God doesn't want to have too much midat hadin, He sprinkles midat rahamim in this. So what do you see from here, Rabotai? What do we see? We see that when it's necessary, God does mix Midat Hadin and Midat Raham. He does mix the red and the white. So therefore, why did you tell me? Why did you tell me by meat and milk? The reason why I can't have meat and milk, says the Berish Chai, is because the meat is red, which is Din, and the milk is white, which is Rahamim, and I'll mix them together. The very first pasuk in the Torah says that Hashem sometimes does mix up Din and Rahamim. You know what it's compared to? It's compared to coffee. Coffee is black and it's bitter. That's midat hadin. When a person takes the milk which is naturally sweet and it's white, he puts the milk inside the coffee. What happens? He's making a mituk hadin. It's not me saying this, by the way. The Mekubalim talk about how important it is to have coffee in the morning. Because when you have coffee in the morning, you're mixing din with rahamim. You're putting the rahamim inside the din. You're sweetening it. And then it becomes drinkable. That's what Hashem wants to do. Hashem wants to make a mituk. He wants to connect these two items. So if that's the case, and Hashem wants to make a mituk, why in the world, says the Ben Ish Chai, is it forbidden to eat milk and meat? If that the whole thing's making a mituk, that's exactly what meat and milk is. It should be permissible. What's the answer? The answer is...
It's the way of the world.
The answer is that meat and milk is the only exception. You're right, Be'emet. Mixing midat hadin and hamim, it's permissible. We want to do that. We want to make sure that there's always some sort of mituk of the judgment, sweetening of the judgment. However, meat and milk is the only exception. Why? Because meat and milk reminds God of the very first sin committed by humankind, which is what? Eitz hadat. Going back to Eitz hadat again. When we eat meat and milk together, we remind God of the sin of Adam HaRishon. How in the world does that remind God of the sin of Adam HaRishon? You want to know a fun fact? Adam HaRishon. Was he a carnivore or was he a vegetarian?
Vegetarian.
The Torah says...
Only trees.
Exactly. The Torah says when God gave Adam Rishon to eat, he only allowed him to eat from the vegetation. Meat was off limits. Look inside the Torah. Look at the Torah. Skip the Mord Hashemesh. Look inside the Torah. Vayomer Elokim. Hine natati lachem et kol esev zoreya zera asher al pnei kol haaretz. Ve'kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz zoreya zara lachem yeh le'ochla. Says Rashi, Hishva lahem behemot v'chayot lema'achal. What does Rashi say? Below irshal le'adam u'li'ishto. It wasn't permitted for man and wife lahamid b'riyah v'lechol basar. You weren't allowed to kill anybody and eat their meat and eat their flesh. Ach kol yerek, except when it came to the vegetation, esev yocholu yachad kulam. All the yerek, all the vegetation was permissible. However, when it came to the meat was asur. When did the meat become mutar? Ukishibau b'nei Noach yitin lehem basar. When came the children of Noach, that's when meat became permissible. Shneimar kol remes asher hu chai ki yerek esev shehitati l'adam rishon natati lachem et hakol. Whatever I said okay to Noach, I'm making even more okay when it comes to the meat. So again, originally, turns out that Adam Rishon was a vegetarian and meat was mutar until Noach. Oh, now watch out, this is the main part of the class right here. Main part of the class. Hatam Sofer says unbelievable. Based on this, he says unbelievable. He says, I'm going to read you the words inside. Second to last paragraph. Ki tachlit achilat basar. Okay, the whole reason why we eat meat, b'shechita kishira, with kosher slaughter, he kedei la'alot nitzazot ha'kedusha. Again, is in order to elevate the holy sparks. Sheish b'toch ha'basar, that we find inside the basar, those sonic coins. Mimadrigat bal chai, to raise it from the chai, which is the animal, mimadrigat ha'adam ha'midaber, or to raise it, to elevate it to the human beings that talk. Midaber. Ve'al kein. On the condition that he uses the strength that he gets from the meat in order to serve God, like we read. That he raises, he elevates all the sparks that are inside living animals. Listen to this is the key line of Hatam Sofer. He goes, the way that it was originally supposed to be, the original intent of God wasn't that we get any nourishment from meat, like it was with the Adam Rishon. The point was with Adam Rishon was he wasn't supposed to be eating any meat. So if that's the case, how are we supposed to make the elevation of the Nitzot? Again, if the whole point is I'm supposed to be collecting these sonic coins from the meat, but Adam Rishon is asur to eat meat, where was the Nitzot supposed to come from? Where was these sparks of holiness supposed to come from?
He is the Nitzot.
He caused them to spread.
Not necessarily. Even after he caused it to spread. Even after he caused it to spread. How is he supposed to collect them? If he can't eat meat, how is Adam Rishon supposed to collect these sparks of holiness? Not the vegetables. No, it needs to be higher. Vegetables is only tomeach. How is he going to get the nitzozot out of the chai?
No.
Oh, very good. It was originally supposed to be that all the nitzotzot, all the sparks of Kedusha was supposed to be found where? It's supposed to be found in the milk only. Says Hatam Sofer, Ela yitaken et nitzotzei HaKedusha bebal chai ayidei sheyishteh chalav vayasem mimenu ma'achlei chalav. You're supposed to drink the milk, make butter, make cheese. That was supposed to be the nitzotzot that Adam Rishon was supposed to make the tikkun on. However, he says, very good. After he ate from the tree, Tovera, from the evil and good tree, and after the Dor Mabul, which is the Noach, and they corrupted the entire world. And they corrupted the entire world. Then that's when Hashem, so to speak, he redirected. He redirected the sparks of holiness, and he said, now instead of being inside the milk, I put them inside the basar himself. Now it became impossible to fix the nitzotzot, only aidei the meat. And therefore what? Says Chatam Sofer, what he's trying to say is, the reason why God doesn't want us to make a mituk between basar and chalav.
Just want to make sure we have enough minyan, because they wanted to have a first floor.
Yeah, it looks like we do.
So we have. Good. That's the mention.
So again, Rabotai, in order why, the reason why, Bemek, I'll tell you, I'll go slow. The reason why you can't eat meat and milk together is because you're mixing dinim. You're mixing din, which is the meat, and hamim, which is the milk. Even though in the entire situation, the Torah, where I see it's permissible to mix mitukadin, coffee inside, milk inside coffee, breshit bara Elokim. But in this situation, it's different. This is the only exception to the rule. Why? Because when we eat meat and milk together, what are we reminding Hashem of? Reminding Hashem that this was the first sin of Adam Rishon, because Hashem says, to be honest, it was supposed to be only supposed to be that Adam Rishon was supposed to make the tikkun ayidei halav. That was the whole goal of the nitzotzot, was only going to be in the halav. Once Adam Rishon sinned, Hashem said, you shifted nature. It's not going to be anymore where what? Where the nitzotzot are found in the halav. Now nitzotzot are only going to be found in the basar. And therefore Hashem says the reason why you cannot eat meat and milk together, even though you're making mituk, it's din with hamim, is because in this situation it reminds God of the first sin of Adam Rishon. It's asur, even though din and rahamim is a good thing. Here, it's not because it's going to be asur, because it reminds God of the change in nature, which is the Eitz Hadat. Okay, we have a few minutes left. I just want to wrap up. So we have 4 answers to our question. What was the question that we had? Why is meat and milk forbidden? According to Rubinoff, we have 3 answers. Answer number 1 is because what? Right? It corrupts the heart. Why? Because it turns the meat together with the milk, it turns into the blood. The blood is achzari, blood is cruelty, and therefore it's mitatem etalev. According to the Rambam, what's the reason of the Yisur? Is because of what? Avodah Zarah. Now, back in the day when the Goyim used to worship Avodah Zarah, they also used to eat meat and milk at the Seudot. Never became a problem. According to Rabbi Rabbi, what's the reason why milk and meat is asur? Chok. Because God said. According to the Ben Ish Chai, why is it asur? It's because you're mixing din and rahamim, and even though usually that's a good thing, but it reminds God of the original sin of Adam Rishon. We have one more question left. What was our question? My question was, go back to the beginning of the pasuk. What was the beginning of the pasuk? Right, Bikurim. And we asked, what is the connection between Bikurim and eating meat and milk? This is the last source I'm going to bring you because he connects everything together. Yismach Moshe. He says the Inyan as follows. Because the truth is, Abutai, this whole responsibility that we have now in order to take out the nitzotzot from the piece of meat, it sounds like a big responsibility, and not many people are equipped to take out these holy sparks from the meat. So what do we do instead? God says, it's okay, I'll give you a backup plan. You ever heard of Bikurim? Bikurim is the first fruit that we give to the Kohen. How about the Ma'aseh? Ma'aseh is the pieces of the animal that we give, again, over to the Kohen. Says God, I'm giving you a backup plan. In case you don't want to extract, or you don't have the ability to extract these holy sparks from the animal, I'm going to command you to give pieces of that animal to who? To the Kohen. And I'm going to transfer all those nitzotzot over to that piece that you give to the Kohen, and then who's going to make the extraction for you? Who's going to make the extraction? The Kohen will do it. And therefore, you don't have the responsibility anymore of you doing it, because the reason that I have Maaser in place is so the Kohen can do the extraction for you. Says the Rabbi Yismach Moshe, Ve'enyan, he, In everything there is sparks of holiness. The key is to transfer them from domem, chai, tzomeach into the medaber, into the human being. Not everybody knows how to eat the proper food, to make the proper brachot, to make the proper shechita. It's gonna go. Who knows where the nitzot is gonna go if you don't do it properly? He says, hakohanim, but the kohanim nitchayedu l'sharato v'le'in l'mata mehem. The kohanim, they know exactly what to do. K'moshe amar u'ba'ata l'kohanim me've'at leviim al kain tziva Hashem yitbarach lehafrish hatruma lekohen. That's why Hashem commanded everybody to take pieces of his food and give it over to the Kohen. Therefore Hashem will transfer all those nitzotzot over to that piece of terumah that you're giving to the Kohen, and the Kohen himself will make the tikkun for you. That's why it's called Reshit. That's why there's such a bad sin that when a non-Kohen, when a Zar eats from the Truma, it's a big sin. Why? Because all the nitzotzot, it's found where? In the piece that you're giving over to the Kohen. If you eat it, what are you doing? You're not fixing the proper tikkun. Just like God, transfer nitzotzot from the milk of the animal to the basar, so too God transfers it from the animal to the Truma, to the reshit, to the bikurim itself. And exactly, and therefore our question was, Rabotai, this is the last point I'm finished. We asked, what is the connection between bikurim and lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo? Because again, lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo is, the point is we're supposed to be extracting nitzotzot. We're supposed to be extracting what? Extracting the holy sparks. But not everybody is a professional in doing it. And therefore what? Bikurim. What do we do bikurim? We take the first fruit, we take the animal, we take pieces of the animal, we give it over to the Kohen, because the Kohen, he knows exactly what job to do. He knows how to properly extract nitzotzot. It's a very deep shiur, but I think at the end of the day, I hope at least that we get a certain amount of clarity, right? If a person would have to ask you on the street now, what is this, the Jewish people, no eating milk and meat, why not? You're going to say, I went to the class. I know exactly why. You're going to go ahead and you're going to sit on the street and you're going to explain to him. We have 4 reasons. We have mitatemet alev. We have we have hulk, and we have benish hai. Not to mix the meat and milk together, because that's mixing din with rahamim. But no, that usually okay. Hashem says in this case it's different. In this case it reminds me of the original sin of Adam Rishon. And finally we understand what the bikurim answer is, because sometimes we can't do it. Then when we give it over to the Kohen, let the Kohen take care of it, just by elevating the nitzot hakadusha. Okay, we'll stop here. Amen. Okay, Rabotai.